Hey everybody, we're going to start back up again after a little short break. We have a little lightning talk coming on. Phasing impacts during construction. Obviously we have a great impact on existing facilities when we build our projects. And I'd like my good friend Brad Hall to come on up. He's a senior principal with Dewberry. But also, as some of you may know, barbecue is a passion of many of us around here, and Brad is a master KCBS judge, so he really knows how to judge meat. So come on up.
Thank you, Don. Always nice to talk about barbecue instead of correction sometimes, so, okay. Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Brad Hall. I'm with Dewberry Architects. And this is going to be the fastest 5 minutes of this session. So, our learning objectives. Our first objective is understand the impact of phased construction and operational facilities for successful outcomes. Understand the impact of increased correctional staff during construction within existing facility and how to minimize disruptions in operations. Understand safety and security procedures integrated into the construction plan to segregate workers and deliveries from inmates during constructions within an existing facility. Our first topic, again, understand the impact of phased construction and operational facilities for successful outcome. It's always nice if you can, during the design process, you can work with the facility and the design professionals to establish the following. Identify correctional staff to be dedicated to the project throughout the duration of the project. Identify an area or areas within the site for the contractor to use as their laydown and storage areas. Identify contractors' entrances and exits in and out of the facility. Establish a routine within your facility that allows contractors access in and out of the facilities. These are very important features. The next thing it's always good to do is during your process, have a schedule so that everybody knows what's going on in the facility. For the first example, number one, again, we're looking at a phased process for the duration. This would be like just for phase 1A, we'll say. Move the people in custody out of the facility, out of the construction area, and for this we're going to allow basically 1 week. And then for your construction activities, we're going to say that's going to take roughly around 2 months. And for the third part of it, the facilities activity in the work area, and this can be the facilities going back in and doing some painting or just miscellaneous work. Roughly that takes about 2 weeks. And then for the fourth item is being able to relocate the persons in custody back into the facility. And for this example, we're allocating roughly about 3 months. Our next item is understanding the impact and increased correctional staff during construction within an existing facility and how to minimize disruptions in their operations. And again, we want considerations for facility investment of the correctional staff for the duration of the project. And again, it's critical to identify your correctional staff that will be assigned to the duration of the project from start to finish. This is a real benefit. And during the design process, please allow these staffs to actually go to the design meetings because these staff always have good suggestions to the design team, which makes your design a much better facility. And then during construction, have the staff, tell them they may be required to actually verify the construction personnel for tool check-in and also for any type of construction entrances. They might be required to escort construction personnel to and from their work areas. And they may be required to man a staff post during the process to ensure that the construction personnel and the people in custody do not come into contact. Our third item is understand safety and security procedures integrated into construction plan to segregate workers and deliverables for people in custody during construction within the existing facility. What you're going to be asked the facility to do is the general contractor will probably provide the facility with a list of contractors that are going to be working on the job. The facility will then do background checks on these people and either say they can or cannot work on the project. Also, typically, we're going to prepare construction badges for the construction workers, so it's very easy for the correctional officers and staff to identify that these workers are actually part of the project and are deemed to be on the site. Another important item is to make sure that you identify and train the correctional staff that will monitor the construction site. And probably the most important part is to review the construction phasing plan with your entire team. This is very important because everybody needs to know exactly what's happening during the construction process and what phase of the construction they're in, so that there's no surprises. Our next item we just want to make sure that everybody knows and they're able to verify that approved contractor and construction personnel are working on the project. They're going to be asked to do tool monitoring. They're going to be asked to monitor what materials are brought into and taken out of the facility. And again, they're going to probably have to be in a position to escort construction personnel to and from their work areas within the facility that you've identified. And then keeping people in custody and the correctionals and the contractors separated from being in the same area they are together. And then always be on the lookout for any kind of construction debris that's left on the site that can be picked up by a person in custody and used as a weapon. Fast 5 minutes. Any questions? Thank you. Hugh, I'm bringing us down to you. Where do we get the barbecue, Don? Okay.
Well, Brad Hall's an awfully hard person to follow, but I will follow his presentation with the story, and that is about the juvenile system in New York City. So the juvenile system in New York City, we had to get all the juveniles off of Rikers Island, and we had to do it by October 18th of the year that the legislation required. So the contractor looked at our schedule and said, we can't do this. And so what they did is they moved all the juveniles into the Band-Aid facility, and then they were able to go without phase construction in the facility that was being renovated. That made the whole process possible. So there is the possibility of short-circuiting what Brad is talking about being required, maybe, in certain circumstances. Okay, well, my name's Hugh Lester, and I'm going to be presenting, I'm from STV, and I'm going to be presenting on the topic of human thermal comfort. I'm skipping over the objectives because my only objective is for you to pay attention to the last couple of slides. You can just let this all wash over you until I get to those last couple of slides. I have to say, Robert Brown is the source for most of this material. He's a professor down in Texas. So, solar radiation from the sun. You have ultraviolet, visible, and solar infrared, and those are separate wavelengths. And solar infrared is different than terrestrial infrared, which is what happens when you heat a surface. You get long-wave radiation. When incoming radiation comes and hits a surface, it's either reflected, absorbed, or transmitted. Energy budgets are what we're talking about here. The reality is that any surface can be evaluated in terms of its energy budget, all the flows of energy towards the surface and away from the surface. They must equal zero. Energy cannot be created or destroyed. So when you look at dry asphalt pavement at midday, and you're looking at each of those inputs or outputs from the line that represents the surface, with arrow widths indicating the relative magnitude of each channel, they have to all add up to zero. When you look at the same thing at night, net solar goes to zero, and so the components that make up the energy budget, again, have to balance. That's true across the entire spectrum of inputs over time. So the temperature of surfaces determine how much radiation is going to result from the solar radiation input in shortwave in terms of the long wave that you get out of it. So when you talk about the energy budget of a person, in this case a person in custody, all the streams of energy towards the person in custody and all losses of energy from the person in custody constitute the energy budget. If it's positive at any time because of the nature of the interaction, You could be overheated. If it's negative, you're underheated. So if you're a person in custody and you are near a window, and the window is only emitting 300 watts per meter squared, and your body, your hot body, is emitting 450 watts per meter squared, there is a negative 150 watts per meter squared difference between those two, which affects your perception of how comfortable you are. Now, saying that, 150 watts per meter squared does not mean that you don't have a zero energy budget. It's just those particular components impact your perception of comfort, okay? So going from a person to a house, it's almost the same thing, just slightly different. Here's the cell. And when you're talking about a cell, you've got 6 surfaces, 4 walls, ceiling, and a floor. So these wall surfaces are shown, at least the wall surfaces are shown in gray with the glazed areas in blue. And each one of the surface temperatures of each of those contribute to the energy budget of the person that's in the cell. This is an example from outside where you're looking at 2 people that are in the same general space. The temperature is same between the two, relative humidity is same between the two, but because you've intervened by putting a wall there, the watts per meter squared is reduced by 5-fold, and the radiation that is being received because one is in the shade is reduced from 1,000 to 400. So sunny and windy, shady and calm. There's only certain things that you can change to affect the energy budget. Remember, this is all washing over you. You don't have to remember any of this, okay? But now I want you to pay attention. So the relative energy carry capacity of forced air versus piped water. You have a duct that's 8 by 12, that's equal to a 1-inch OD PEX tube with water at the desired temperature. So an array of flexible PEX could provide hydronic heating or cooling in ceilings, walls, or floors as a retrofit. The blue lines are examples of a retrofit application of PEX tubing in a wall covered up with a security material. You're increasing the temperature of those walls, which increases the long-wave radiation, which changes the energy budget. That can be either heating or cooling. It could be all 6 surfaces, by the way. All 6 surfaces could have that. You wouldn't need that. You decide the cheapest way to do it, to retrofit a facility. So my argument is, don't put in air conditioning, put in this, and also have more ventilation, because ventilation actually makes the person colder in the winter, but you can offset it with this, right? Words, lots of words, but it's about specific heat capacity of water versus specific heat capacity of air. That's all you need to capture from this slide. So if you augment the long-wave radiation emitted or absorbed by surfaces in the cell, you can modify the human cell energy model, improving human thermal comfort without air conditioning. That's it. Thank you.
Brad did it in 5, I did it in 10.
There we go. Our first couple lightning talks. Next is a session talking about master planning for a 94-year-old historic state correctional facility. I think it happens to be in Ohio, with Tony Schaefer, Lori Kuppenrath, and Mark Van Allen.
I get a chance to sit in the cushy chair as soon as I'm done talking, so I'm going to go through these slides really quick because it looks comfortable. Anyways, as you all know, my name's Tony Schaefer. This is the master planning for a 94-year-old facility in Chillicothe, Ohio. Brief introductions. I'm the Bureau Chief of Construction, Activation, Maintenance, and Sustainability for the Ohio Department of Rehabilitation and Correction. And I'll let everyone introduce themselves.
Mike. Linda Burnauer with DLR Group. Lori Kaufman. Lori Kaufman with DLR Group.
Mark Van Allen, architect with DLR Group. The one guy who knows how to turn on a microphone on the dais.
All right, so objectives. Understand how master planning can provide solutions for development while maintaining population. Building and construction is very complex. It's even more complex when you're doing it inside of a facility. For those of you who have experienced that, I'm sure you can relate. I always tell everybody, if you imagine yourself driving a bus down the highway and changing the tires at the same time, that's what we're faced with operationally as a facility. And as design professionals, that's what we're asking you to come up with a solution for. So it's not easy, and it's really atypical, I think, in the construction field. And so as design professionals, we're asking a little bit more than your normal counterparts. Identify the benefits of having physical and operational assessments of existing facilities to plan for the future, using a substantial number of those assets while adding new opportunities for housing that meets current standards. And tearing everything down, starting from scratch and building a completely new facility, it's not practical, it's not funded, and in many cases, it's not fiscally responsible. As practitioners, we're trying to find solutions to maximize what we have. The buildings we have currently, we can talk about how dilapidated they are, how old they are, stuff doesn't work, the roof's leak, things are breaking. But the solution can't be to tear down and start over in many cases. I mean, there's obviously some cases that are beyond repair, but how do we maximize what we have? I think that's, as a committee and with this symposium, that's what we're trying to find out, is ways to maximize what's already there. And then the last objective is to understand how engaging with architects, planners, and other design consultants can help them more effectively plan for the future of their campuses. So as practitioners, it's important for us to understand we don't have all the answers. We need to engage people that have that specialized knowledge. They can provide input to us, cost estimates, industry best practices, emerging technologies, and things that they're more in tune with as far as cutting edge. There's the disclosure. So we're going to cover a few topics. We're going to discuss the challenge we faced while working on a master plan in Chillicothe, Ohio. This site, it's not only an old facility, but there's a lot of historical significance, which adds another layer of challenges to us. So the reason we picked this as a good case study for a workshop is that any problem you could possibly imagine, I believe exists at this site. There's things that are broken, nothing works, the heat never turns on when it's supposed to, it's hot, it's been modified, that has impacted its the indoor thermal comfort. We've closed off the ventilation that was originally designed 100 years ago or so. And then on top of that, there's Indian mounds, and former Camp Sherman, and all these historical things. We can't dig without an archaeologist in sight. So I feel like if you can figure it out at Chillicothe, that gives you you've accomplished a lot. So, and then also the approach to planning for the future. We had to take into account the age of the facility, the historical significance, phasing, how it impacts the operations. We don't have the luxury of having overflow housing in Ohio, so if we are tasked with having to build a new dorm, we have to operate the dorm that it's replacing while we're building the new. And we have limited real estate, right? We got to be inside the fence, and there's a lot of other impacts that compound the complexity of the issues that we're dealing with over time. So challenges of an aging prison. I know we talked a lot about it, and I think everyone can probably relate or can relate. That's why we're here. It's part of why the symposium is here. So structural deterioration. The building components, as they get older, they fail at a more rapid rate, more downtime, increased maintenance, increased repairs, and a lot of unexpected repairs too, and those become costly. And those are also operationally extremely impactful, because if you're not expecting the power to go out and it goes out in the middle of the night, then you're trying to, figure it out on the fly. One thing in corrections is that we've gotten very good at being reactive to things, so we can usually tackle those issues as an organization. We've grown used to that, but that's part of the culture we're trying to break. These things shouldn't be normal. I mean, we shouldn't, be used to the roof leaks and the heat that doesn't work and those types of things. So I think culturally, as a group, we can start to break that. Safety concerns, the deterioration of buildings, it creates safety issues. You have things that are broken glass that fall. I know at Chillicothe we've got fire escapes that I don't think I would rather just jump out the window than, if I had to escape from a fire, than try to navigate those. So that, again, really bad shape. And so these aging facilities also, they don't meet operational needs. The common thing that always comes up is we're trying to utilize spaces that they weren't designed for. The floor plans, the layouts, they're not optimal. And again, we're not using them for what they were designed to do. And these all have huge cost implications. I know in Ohio, and I think it's pretty similar in other states, and I know Texas, the executive director from Texas talked about it this morning, the budget to operate the facilities is a different pot of money. The capital investment is a different pot of money. So we're trying to get construction dollars. But I think one thing that we need to do better, maybe as practitioners, and for those of us that are asking for money, is finding a better way to communicate the need and the impact. If we're not investing in the capital, that operating budget and that maintenance budget is going to continue to escalate. So I just got a few pictures here. They say a picture's worth 1,000 words, but again, this is not uncommon. I'm sure any facility you go throughout the country, you're going to see cracks, things that are deteriorating and falling apart. Nice little crack on the floor. The steam tunnels there on the right, you can see, it's seen better days, right? And then again, these deteriorations have a compounding effect, because now the steam tunnels, at some parts of them, have been deemed unsafe for people to go into. Well, all of our utilities, our heat, everything goes through those tunnels. If there's a collapse, that'll be catastrophic for the facility and its operation. Safety concerns. Let me get I hit the wrong button. Okay, there. That little piece of stone right there is getting ready to fall, as you can see. That's a huge safety concern. Right here, you see the rusted windows and all the sharp metal and the ceiling tile that's falling down due to roof leaks and deferred maintenance. But those people in these facilities, our staff, the incarcerated population, and when those things fall, they go one direction, and that's down. So Non-functional space, again, another common theme that we can continue to bring up. This space here, this is school, and we don't have separate classrooms, so we've got cubicle soft office space that we've tried to make classrooms, and you can see they've got some chairs and a couple of rooms off to the side, but again, it wasn't built to be a school, but we're turning it into a school. Sound carries, there's a lot of echoing. It's not the best learning environment. But one thing I will say that you probably notice if you go around to different facilities is that as a corrections staff, they are very innovative. They're doing the best they can. And I think that's worth noting that I know a lot of the people that do programming and custody staff aren't in attendance to this, but I think it's worth recognizing that they're doing a lot with what they have too. So again, cost implications here. You can see this is in the power plant, and we've got this giant water return or water pipe. I think this is the makeup water. Sprung a leak. Right there, you can see they threw some blankets over it just to keep it from spraying out everywhere and destroying everything else. Talking about the innovative staff, right? They did what they could at the time to just keep things from getting worse. And then they try to collect as much water and funnel it to a drain. But these are very costly. As you all know, if you call somebody for emergency repair, you're paying higher wages, higher rates, and it's disruptive to the facility. Energy use, extremely high. I think one thing that Don brought up earlier is utilizing these old buildings and finding ways to utilize that thermal flywheel, as he called it. The old buildings, a lot of them are structurally sound in some ways. And if we can, again, maximize what we have, that saves a lot of cost. And so, again, I think that throughout the day, I've heard lots of good ideas and different things and ways that we can maximize that. So I think that's a good discussion. And again, emergency repairs, I touched on that. And disrupting the operation. For those that work in maintenance or facilities design, every time there's a disruption I'm getting a phone call. If something breaks, the power goes out, the heat goes out, they're calling me, and their problem becomes my problem. But those are stressful for the staff, and again, maybe not directly related to facilities management, but our staff deal with enough stress as it is. So I feel obligated in my role to take whatever stress I can away from the staff that work in these facilities. All right, so I touched a little bit about some of the things we were dealing with at Chillicothe and are still dealing with, but we get to this point to where it becomes overwhelming as a practitioner, or if you're in facilities management at a facility, or if you're a maintenance supervisor. There's just so much that needs done, and you don't even know where to start. You just see this giant hill of things in front of you, and that's kind of what led to the discussion of meeting with DLR and starting through the master planning process. And so I'll pass it off to Linda.
So when we first walked into Chillicothe in February of 2023, the staff was extremely motivated to talk to us, but they were also so overwhelmingly in love of their facility. They gave us a 2-inch thick notebook of paper about the history of the project. So I've got a little bit of a synopsis up on the slide, but I'm going to talk through some of the history that they shared with us that helped us formulate our ideas as we went through the process. So there's this area called Shriver Circle. And that was the first thing they brought up. It's like, you have to stay away from that because that's a Hopewell site, and, you know, you can't see it anymore. We found it by looking at it underground with radiation, or there are some other methods for measuring that. There's a very slight depression that you can see. There was a mound in the center of that circle, and that was a burial mound. And then farther north on the site is a group of mounds. And so in 1846, and these images are in the facility. They're so proud of this history that these images are in the facility. In 1846, they did a survey of the two sites and identified it. And the line that's bisecting the Shriver Circle is a canal, because Ohio was just transversed with canals to ship goods from the East Coast, because Ohio was a state in 1813. You know, they were still pretty well connected to the Northeast, and everything came in through the canals. And then that line now is County Road 104 that's in front of the facility. Here's an illustration of the mound sites. They're a National Historic Park and a national monument. So this is just north of the facility. And then in 1917, the federal government took possession of the land and decided to build a camp for World War I training. And it's called Camp Sherman. Took over both sides of what's now County Road 104. It was full of barracks and a lot of accessory buildings. And then after the war, in 1918, they converted it to a German POW facility. And then the whole site was then just decommissioned in 1921. And then in 1925, there was an act that established reformatories for young men, and one of the first sites chosen was at Chillicothe, and it was called the United States Industrial Reformatory. They started just with remodeling what was left of the Camp Sherman buildings, and then in 1929, they built two, the main neoclassical revival style buildings, and then there was over the course of 20 years, 24 neoclassical buildings were built on that site, and it maintained operation until 1966 as a federal facility. And then in 1966, it was leased to the state of Ohio, and they renamed it the Chillicothe Correctional Institution, although the stone still says United States Reformatory on the pediment, but they renamed the facility, and then Ohio purchased the whole site in 1982. In 2021, they went and certified it through the National Parks Service and listed it on the National Register. But that was just for the administration building, because they knew that they had to do something with the facility going forward and didn't know what was going to stay and what was going to go. They just wanted to make sure they saved this one administration building. So here's a site plan, or a Google Earth image of the facility, and you can see by the color of the roofs, those are all copper roofs. They're all copper, and they've been maintained, they've been replaced when necessary. The The administration building is on the far left, and right behind it, in the telephone pole configuration, is the secure housing. And then the last piece of that is the laundry and gymnasium. That portion of the building is partially unable to be used because of structural damage. So that was one area that we knew we had to focus on. Then the warden there wanted to keep the look of the facility as a campus, as opposed to making it look like a correctional facility. So from the road, it looks like a campus. So we were charged with maintaining as many of the buildings on the front side or the bottom of the photograph, and then also maintaining the chapel, which was built in the 1950s. It's a mid-century modern building. But, and the buildings along the road are currently dormitory buildings, but we decided that those could be repurposed for something else. So part of what we were charged with doing was conducting physical and operational assessments and looking at different options, making recommendations, and evaluating the occupancy and the population, evaluating the space requirements and the phasing, and then we, organized and published our findings. So this on the left was the assessment form that we designed for the facility. We had one for operations and then a different one for the physical assessment. But you can see the conditions that we were looking at, and this was in the condemned portion of the telephone pole building. That's where those pictures are from. You can see here's some more pictures of what we encountered. Tony was talking about the fire escapes that were built after the buildings were occupied, and those, they're made of steel and they're deteriorating and they need to be replaced and repurposed, or something needs to happen with those. But you can see some of the conditions that we observed. And then in the report, we listed the condition. Yellow was considered fair. We rated the spaces and made recommendations for their use. And then we provided them with a site plan where we did the physical and the operational assessment side by side so they could see which buildings at a glance needed to replace, like the double reds obviously needed to be replaced, but operationally you can see they were in worse shape than some of the physical conditions. And then I'm going to turn it over to Lori, and she's going to talk about the planning and programming.
So first I'd like to start by stepping back and saying that the staff and incarcerated population at this facility work together really well to make these buildings work. That Linda and Tony showed how dilapidated they are, and to call those front buildings dormitories, they're more like glorified hallways, right? So you have overpopulated hallways where these folks are living. So just to give you an idea, the staff and incarcerated people are doing a phenomenal job. They're being successful in what they have. I just like to think about how much better they could do if we could provide them with appropriate space. So to start with, there's not a single housing unit on the site that I would keep. So yeah, those are gone. We want to look at how we can provide the appropriate spaces, the appropriate densities of spaces, so we're not overcrowded, and then just allow people to get good sleep that will allow them to function better during the day. This button? Wrong button. And then this button. So then we also want to look at their behavioral health building. It's a newer building on campus. I don't remember when it was built, but when I walked up to it, I thought it was like a archive building because there's not a single window in the building. It's a lovely space inside. If we just let some daylight in, it would be even better. And then the program spaces are in very historical buildings, as Tony showed. They're lovely daylit spaces, but what would really be helpful is if they had actual walls around classrooms and spaces that could be used throughout, even to the evening time. The chapel is a lovely space. We wouldn't want to change that, maybe spruce it up a bit, but that's about it. Adjust the visiting. Visiting is what I would consider a small room for a 2,300 person campus. And they actually have the higher custody offenders coming to this open visiting room, which is across campus from where they're housed, to visit in kind of an awkward way that's right along the side of the family visiting space. And so we'd like to adjust how that is done. And then while we were there, they were under construction with a new medical building. And so the circulation pathways across campus were not as they typically were. And so as we were looking at the master planning, we really wanted to understand how best to make the pathways between all these buildings work as we went forward. Now, I apologize, the next few slides are spreadsheets, but my life is in spreadsheets, so we're gonna go with it. So this is the table of the current population usage. They have about 2,750 beds on site. They are not using 644 of those beds due to maintenance or usability issues, and then there are another handful of beds that they're not using for various reasons. Even though their population can be up to 2,750, the day we were there, they were at a little around 2,200 beds. So we looked at how we could, going back to what I said about the incarcerated population and the staff working together well on their programs and on how just the facility works overall, they really like how they have it set up in terms of this type of population is in a dorm, this type of population is in a therapeutic community, and those sort of things. So they wanted to look at how we replaced those facilities in kind to provide them with the same type of programming in a more appropriate situation. So we were able to come up with a very similar number to get to that 2,750 number by replacing those different programs in kind. But what that meant was that we were going to increase the population. I don't expect you to increase the square footage. I don't expect you to read this, but we took, we didn't do detailed programming for this. We did some benchmarking. So we looked at some very recent programming they had done on other facilities, some programs that we had done at other places in the United States, as well as some spaces that they already had to come up with a benchmark example of how much space they would need on campus to house the 2,700-ish beds, and that's about a little over 800,000 square feet. And so we developed a phasing plan, and as the team likes to talk about it, the facility kind of told us how to come up with this phasing plan, just be based on where specific housing units were not being used as effectively, and so we could replace those, take those down, build new, and then go through the rest of the phasing. Because remember, we can't use any land outside of the secure perimeter because of the historic nature of it all. So we had to stay within, which means we had to tear down to replace as opposed to really wanting to build new first, right? And then replace. So over the course of the phasing, though, we were able to keep the 2,750 beds available on site because Ohio does not have the flexibility of moving people off site. And sometimes we were able to get a lot more beds on site if they were keeping the same densities, but it would also allow them to reduce some densities in these spaces as we're going forward to really to reduce the stress and the resident experience as we're going forward with the phasing options. So now, Mark's going to talk about phasing.
Thank you, Linda. And if I can figure this out, which way do I push to make? Oh, okay, very good. So I'm going to, try and summarize not only the presentation that my co-workers have put forth, but a lot of the things that have been said today. I think that almost every presentation that's been made today informs the notion of how do you put forth a master plan for a facility like this. Tony's already talked about some of his challenges as the owner-operator. We've talked about, I think Steve Carter talked about the notion of not being able, through funding and political resources necessarily, to keep up with all of the maintenance needs, especially as the facility gets older. So in this facility, we see some deferred maintenance and some fairly crumbling windows and mad masonry and housing units that have deteriorated to the point that they're in fact condemned. And we're not just talking about square footage that exists on the campus. We want to talk about the quality of the square footage that exists on the campus and how that relates to what we want to do not only today, but going forward. So that brings in notions of what Mr. Carter talked about this morning as it related to the quality of housing, the quality of programming, the things that Dr. Timmy talked about better supporting our population, helping them get better and provide them with appropriate counseling and support spaces that probably aren't existing there today. Lori already outlined that, we are somewhat constricted on this site because we don't want to go outside the perimeter for fear that we're going to dig up a Hopewell archaeological, I was going to say agricultural, but that's the wrong, archaeological site and get ourselves behind the 8 ball there. And we listened carefully to the staff, the warden and the ODRC staff about their desire to sort of maintain their existing front, the historic front that they put forth with, the neoclassical red brick buildings and the green patina copper roofs. So we had a great presentation a few minutes ago about phasing, right? Tony and Lori have already outlined for us that we don't have a lot of excess beds elsewhere in the system to move people to. So we need to accomplish all of the additions, replacements, and remodeling within the campus. So, I like to think about master planning sometimes like that little game you play at Cracker Barrel, the little triangular piece of wood with the golf tees in it, right? And you've got one hole, and you can move one golf tee into that hole, and that creates another hole somewhere else, and you kind of move that around. You try and play that game, and it always frustrates me because I always think that I'm smarter than I am, and I can never win the stupid thing. But that's the kind of thing that we're looking at here. And we have already, how do I do that? Okay. Where do I push the button for the laser? Green button. So we already had the first hole that was existing in the site right here. And they've already created a new medical hospital facility. So that sort of filled in maybe the only empty spot on the campus. Now you'll say, well, Mark, what about all this land out here? Well, this is all recreational area. We don't want to necessarily get rid of that. We don't want to put new buildings in front of the row of historic structures here. And then that Schreiber Circle that Linda was talking about goes around through here. So it may look vacant, but we really didn't consider that to be one of the holes for us to move one of our golf tees to. So phase one, we just began to look at how can we move things around, how can we create security perimeters to cordon off active facility from used facility, and we're going to create a new housing complex down here using ODRC prototypical housing that's already been developed. incorporating a lot of the things that Steve Carter talked about this morning, bunks on the ground, dormitories, cubicles, good acoustic control, good ventilation, better situation for our staff. We're going to put that in a place where the existing medical facility is there. You can begin to see the red underneath it, because that function has moved up to this hole. And then we do have a little bit of land back here, and we're going to move all of the campus support facilities to that location. Right now, all the campus support facilities, commissary, storage, warehouse, plumbing shop, paint shop, welding shop, carpentry shop, sort of exist in a hodgepodge, haphazard manner across the site. And they're not big components, but if you take them together as a whole, they really stand in the way of the master plan. So that's phase 2. And from there, as Linda said, the project really did just tell us where to go, because we knew where the first peg went, we know where the second peg goes, and as we work our way through, we go in, and this is probably the most difficult to accomplish phase, because we do have the telephone pole building that Linda was talking about that does have the small amount of cell housing that exists on the site. And it's also the part that has the most structural damage and observational issues. Oh, I forgot, where's Bruce? I forgot to say we needed to analyze our buildings for all of the latent security issues that Mr. Umpvoigt talked about when we're looking at how to reuse these buildings. I missed giving Bruce a pat on the back. This is the hardest one, because we really do, while we have the capacity for beds, actually increased capacity for beds with what we've done in phase 1. This is dormitory, and we're going to be moving people that are typically held in cells out while we're creating this more secure cell-oriented housing. Here we get into the middle of the campus. Again, we're looking at using the prototypical dormitories from ODRC. But then we're beginning to look at some of the existing housing that we want to keep on site, and we're really going to transform that into those temporary classrooms that Dr. Timmy was talking about. These temporary classrooms are poured-in-place concrete buildings with brick walls and copper roofs on them. But we're going to keep those and begin to reuse those. And so we begin to march through the campus, doing similar things in each phase. And when we're done, we remodel some of our existing buildings. This is where we're going to look at a historic restoration of the one building, the building on the left here that is on the National Register, keeping that as the administration building, but turning that into the historic jewel that it can be, keeping the chapel and doing some of the other remodeling that is programmed for the site. When it's all done, you can see what we've done. The yellow buildings are those buildings that are on site that we're keeping and remodeling. The sort of the salmon buildings and the gray buildings are the newer buildings that we're really not touching. And then the purple and the blue are the new housing that we're going to create on the site. We're a total of 5 phases. Again, kind of going back to repeat what Tony said, if we had the capacity to move everybody into the temporary facility like a New York juvenile, the total nut, the big ask of the Ohio State Legislature to do all this work would probably be beyond the realm and beyond the political palatability of it. And by going at this in 5 phases, we can break this up into work that would be more palatable to the taxpayer. And then we were looking again, we wanted to pay attention as we were developing the master plan, not only to the buildings that we were building, but we wanted to pay attention to the space between the buildings. The pathway, the current pathway from the housing that goes around through here sneaks through a sort of a second level bridge in the historic building to get back to the dining hall. And we wanted to not get rid of that pathway, again, do anything with the recreation, but we wanted to provide more of a campus quadrangle type approach as you can move through the middle of the campus with some green spaces, maybe even set up for exterior programming opportunities to complete what we hope to see is a successful master plan for a 94-year-old historic state correctional facility that meets 21st century standard. So with that, I think the team is ready to entertain any questions. Well, I mean, Tony, you can talk to that, or?
So for that, I can't tell you the exact answer because there's so many phases, and it's really dependent on how much gets funded. So currently, we only got funded for a portion of the phase one, and to build that new dormitory, we're looking at 3 to 5 years, and that's for that phase. And then so now we've broken phase one into 2 phases essentially because of funding. But if you 3 to 5 years, I mean, this is going to go on for some time, unless there's plus incrementally, sequentially, we can only do so much at one time, anyways, because of space constraints. So it's going to be an ongoing thing, probably long after I'm gone.
Linda and Laura will retire. I'll still be doing it. Right, Daryl? Yes, sir.
I was curious about the older buildings and how they're being utilized and no longer being used as housing.
Our notion would be that they would be staff support and programming spaces. As Linda said, they're never really that good for housing. And if you remember back to Dr. Steve Carter's picture of the dormitory, they're like that, only not as wide in the short dimension. The buildings themselves are poured in place concrete and exterior masonry and with a metal roof. The envelope in the structure is still viable. It's just not anything that we could recreate to make what we would consider to be 21st century housing. We think it's applicable for smaller programming spaces, classrooms, offices. So again, like in the Massachusetts stuff that Dr. Timmy was talking about, that these yellow buildings, I don't know if I go back. Yeah, the yellow buildings, this is the gymnasium, and this is the auditorium, and this is the chapel. But these 5 buildings in here would be administration, support, and programming. We do have some issues with them. They'll need some upgrades as it relates to ADA compatibility. First floors are not at grade, and there's currently no elevators to go between the floors. But they'll need some work. But again, we were listening closely to our client's desire to keep the historic fabric of the campus on that side, as at front of the street. Oh, I see somebody waving in the back through the... You have to understand that this light is glaring right in the face, and you can see me, but I can't see you that well.
Was the project considered historic because of Indian burial ground?
Well, there are several historic components that Linda outlined for us, right? So we're right smack dab in the middle of Hopewell Indian Territory with archaeological sites. We have a national monument site to the northeast. We have the Schreiber Circle that's out front. Then we have the history dating back to the U.S. Army base, and the fact that this one building right here is actually on the National Register of Historic Places. So National Parks is concerned about that one. We thought that, I've heard the discussion that the ODRC thought about putting these 3 on the register as well, but chose not to do so in the event that we came through this master plan and we thought we had to do something to them. So there's formal National Parks history, there's informal, we care about it history, there's Native American history, And there's just the general fact that we've had important governmental buildings on this site for over 100 years. Sure.
One more.
Anybody out there? I can't see that. Yes.
Did you offer an opinion of cost in today's dollars for that project and by square foot or overall project?
Yeah. Okay.
We had, each phase was costed by a general contractor who does a lot of work for the state of Ohio, and it was essentially by phase, and they looked at square footage, but it was also by use. So it was a rated square foot cost, and then but we gave them the bottom line for each phase.
In 2020.
In $2024, and then, and also an escalation for 10 years. Phase one, what I remember, we gave them a cost of a little bit over 100 million. They don't have that to do, so that's why they're gonna only do half of phase one.
Anybody else I'm not seeing out there? All right. Well, thank you, everybody. Do we have another speaker after this, or does this conclude the session? 2 more speakers. All right. Thank you, everybody.
Well, here we are. We're almost there. We have 2 lightning talks left. Been a great day. We have Eric Goodman and Jamie Britnell from Willow. I want to talk about unlocking safer spaces and addressing vulnerable locking systems, which we all have a concern with, and how to handle that in modern construction. Good afternoon, guys.
What's the green advance? All right, good afternoon, everyone. I guess there's only a few more speakers between us and getting out, so we'll try to make this as entertaining as possible, but also we know we're talking about some serious things, so we want to actually keep it a little serious. But yeah, what we're going to talk about is unlocking safer spaces and trying to make sure that we're addressing the locking system concerns that exist in our facilities today, and maybe taking a different approach. My name's Jamie Britnell, and this is Eric Goodman. Most of you know Eric. You probably hadn't got a clue who I am. But we both work for Willow, and we're both passionate about this topic. In this session, what we're going to try to talk about is trying to urge you to transform the way that you approach locking systems. We're going to try to encourage you to do that in a couple of different ways. First off, by recognizing that vulnerabilities actually exist. Some departments don't really think they have problems until they actually get down and start talking to people, but we want you to recognize that those problems do exist. Understanding the consequences and the impact that those vulnerabilities have, and then identifying what those root causes are so that you can fix those problems as you do renovations or building new buildings. Secondly, we want you to ensure and give you some ideas on how we can build or renovate facilities that help solve these problems and withstand the realities that exist in today's environment. And that's going to include kind of changing the way you do your specifications potentially, maybe updating the way you write your requirements to make sure that door and lock security isn't just grouped into your normal construction projects like they have been for 20, 30, 40 years, but actually are kind of separated and are given the attention that they deserve. So these are ripped from today's headlines. Can someone do the Law and Order sound for me? I blurred this out so that it doesn't indict anyone particular in this room. I don't think anybody in here has these stories, but these stories come about, I don't know, I get these once once a week, once every 2 weeks, where something related to door and lock security has caused an issue inside of a facility, whether that's an attack on another inmate, attack on staff, or far be it some type of event where someone actually gets killed in that event. And so these are, again, these problems are out there, they exist, and believe me, this is not the way that you want to find out that you've got problems. The consequences of failed locks not only impact the lives of the residents inside the facility, but they also impact the lives of the correctional officers that are there and the other staff. And these types of stories kind of arise from things like this. These are not AI-generated pictures, by the way. These are real photos that we've taken in facilities. For some of our engineers, our sales team, estimators go out and take pictures, whether it's things stuffed into locks or locks that have failed completely and they've been replaced by padlocks, been replaced by pins dropped in things. Once your locks start failing and vulnerabilities are exploited, these are the types of things, and we've talked to the folks on both sides of these doors. The inmates don't feel safe with this. One asked, what if there's a fire? Are they going to be able to unlock all these before we can all get out? And then the staff certainly doesn't feel safe when they know that things are being stuffed into locks and these inmates can get out anytime that they want. So, with the fact that these exist and these vulnerabilities are out there, the question really comes to, how do we solve these problems? So Eric's going to talk about some of the root causes and where these problems arise and how they come about. So Eric?
So slide sends a shiver up your spine if you're running a facility, and we've all seen the decline in from a lot of things. Budget constraints. Money makes the world go round. Anybody that says money doesn't matter never has any. So money thing as far as maintenance cost. The other thing is our inmate population seems to get a lot more savvy. They sit there and they look at things and analyze it and figure out how to beat it. So a lot of the stuff that we have in there today, thinking that we have a really secure facility, they teach us real quick that they know the workarounds. So the other thing is staffing, which goes back to money. We're all short-staffed. Everybody I talk to needs more. And as a result, I've seen a serious uptick in massive camera packages and indirect supervision models, which, as a lot of you know, doesn't bode well. You have folks sitting behind a camera and not making rounds and things like that happen, and it's one problem that leads to the next. We did a survey, and this is a telling stat, right? And we asked if folks had experienced problems with their locking devices, and we got a 50-50 yes and no. That's pretty cool, but the telling stat is, have you ever had doors that you thought were locked that were not, that were showing green indications, and they were not actually locked because of the inmate's manipulation? 64% of the folks came back and said, we've had that, we've lived through that. As an administrator, I've had inmate deaths as a result of that very issue. So that is that just kind of makes you wonder, is my facility secure? Is my facility safe? So the way we change this, and bless everybody's heart here anyway, because keeping these old facilities running, having been an administrator at several, it's a challenge. It's a challenge to keep them up and going. It's a challenge to take something old and keep it relevant. So we have to look have to kind of break the cycle of copy and paste mentality that we've had forever, and we need to look at real innovative solutions to our locking systems. We have to we have to get real world definitions of what we need, what each facility needs. Everybody's operational concerns are different and unique, so we need to have specific information in that regard. With the RFPs and everything that go out for new facilities, for major renovations of older facilities, again, we need to look at technology and the performance of what you're going to put in there, because as you know, you only usually get one shot at this. Your budget drives that. So you need the best that you can get when you actually get your project established. So with that, I'll open it up for questions.
All right, thank you, everybody. Appreciate the time. If there's anything you want to talk about, let us know afterward.
All right, our last lightning talk of the day. We're going to talk about a very interesting topic. Planning for the 10% that just doesn't leave corrections. And Brooke Martin, my very good friend from Dewberry, is going to come up and talk about that. An important population.
This is another lightning talk, so you're very close to having your freedom this afternoon. So my name is Brooke. I work at Dewberry. Appreciate everybody sticking around this late. Hopefully this has been interesting for you. The topic that we're going to cover has these three objectives. Understand the PRA. Do I have an echo? No. Okay. Understand the PRA sequential intercept model. Understand the type of inmate and patient that will likely not return to society. And understand how corrections can better support that long-term 10% that remains within your care and the staff that provides care for them. So, how many people in this room, raise your hand if you've ever heard of the sequential intercept model? A few, and this might be new to others. So PRA, which is Policy Research Associates, they basically came up with this sequential model. And I would encourage you to take photos of the slides if these are of interest to you. We'll be around after this if you want to chat. But basically, everybody that comes into the justice system comes through these 5 intercepts. Intercept 0 is the crisis lines. Intercept 1 is where they actually have that first arrest. And the folks that we're talking about that don't leave corrections are actually going no further than intercept 4. They're going to stay in the pink area. So when we think about all the people that are going through the justice system, some of the data that's out there as of the spring 2024, and we'll get another update for last year, but spring 2024 had the data for 2023, and 1.8 million were incarcerated. I have a little typo on here. It's not an increase of 4 million, it's an increase of 400,000. So don't let that scare you. Just a little typo. Sometimes math is hard. But more than 200,000 of those people are serving life sentences. And so for every 7 people that are in prison, 1 of them is serving a life sentence. That's significant. And it's significant for you because that population doesn't leave your care. So who are they? Oops. Typically, they've been charged with murder or sexual offenses, violent crimes, drug-related offenses, or something other like aircraft hijacking or terrorism, those types of things. Out of that, if you group it, the graphic on the far right shows that The majority of it is actually for murder, 73%. And so looking at the second objective, understanding who they are, what those issues are, they're coming to you, they have lots of healthcare issues, mental health issues. They have likely a peer or have health that is older. They may fall under geriatric care. And they never leave. So this bottom line is really important. Each year that somebody spends in prison cuts their life expectancy by 2 years. So when we have 30% of those that are serving a life sentence that are 55 years or older, some say 50, that means they're geriatric. 30% have geriatric care that they're needing, geriatric spaces that they're needing. And your existing facilities typically don't have all of those ADA components. They're not very accessible. They're not easy to get around. They have lots of risk associated. And more than 50% in prison are actually serving sentences for violence. So they're also sometimes risky populations to be around. But if the end goal is truly rehabilitation and reintegration, this invisible population has become even more visible when we think of the focus on reentry, which is incredibly important. But let's not forget those that are going to stay within these aging facilities and the staff that take care of them. So these last two slides are really important. Take a picture of them. If we think about somebody's life expectancy being cut by 2 years for every year that they're serving, how do we improve somebody's life behind bars? We can give them access to move their body, access to movement, access to outdoor rec, access to large muscle exercise equipment. We can look at the food we're providing. And I know funding is an issue, so I'm not suggesting anything that anybody doesn't know, but it is conversations that we need to have more and more. We can pay attention to the weight and shape of that person, the physical fitness. Of course, we hope that alcohol and drugs are not coming within the facility, but we all know that there are times that that happens. We can offer activities that keep the brain active, education, mentorship, relationship, skill-building opportunities. Being mindful, what is their view of self? And getting regular checkups. Lots of facilities are retrofitting their health care, bringing that more increased access to care. Really giving them a purpose. What is the purpose of somebody that is behind bars? What is their life purpose, and how can they envision that? And how can your staff support that? And what are the good outcomes that come out of that? They can be a credible messenger. They can find ways to help the facility over the years as a trustee. And the last slide, a proven solution centered on human dignity that exists. And many folks have talked about these elements today. Retrofitting unconditioned cells, providing direct access to daylight, increase access to the outdoor recreation and connection to nature, provide appropriate geriatric care, improve dietary food plans, implement incentivized programs and pilot programs for trusted long-term inmates. Because somebody's serving a life sentence, it doesn't mean that everybody deserves the same space. People do change over time. Reduce and remove solitary confinement. We've already seen that happening in some of the states. And integrate service providers that reduce costs and associated with keeping that inmate's family near and dear. Keep those relationships strong or strengthen those relationships over time. Expand the high-quality post-secondary education and skilled training in prison, and train correctional staff to help them develop the leadership and the conflict resolution skills with these folks. So just a note, I know people are very passionate about corrections, and oftentimes this 10% doesn't get talked about very much, but we do want to bring them into the conversation where they fit in aging facilities where they literally cannot ever leave. Thank you.